This video is brought to you by Nebula. The Asia-Pacific region has become a key battleground in the geopolitical rivalry between China and the United States and its allies, with the two camps vying for influence through economic, diplomatic and military means. There's been a number of bilateral agreements and flurry of diplomatic activity. So in this video, we'll explain what the US and China have been doing, why the region is getting renewed attention, and what the countries at the centre of it all think. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. To get things started, it's worth looking at some quick context. The wider Asia-Pacific obviously covers a huge area, but this video is going to specifically focus on the parts of the Pacific known as Polynesia, Micronesia and Melanesia, which contain a whole load of island nations, some larger like Papua New Guinea and the Solomon Islands, and many much smaller ones like Kiribati and Tuvalu. At a glance, the United States looks pretty far away from where we're talking about, but it actually has a fairly significant foothold in the region, going back more than a century. You've obviously got the US state of Hawaii, which was annexed in 1898, but also the US territories of Guam, the Northern Mariana Islands and American Samoa, as well as three sovereign countries, Micronesia, Nauru and the Marshall Islands, which all have compacts of free association with the US dating back to the second half of the 20th century. China's engagement with the region, however, is something that has grown more recently, particularly in the past decade or so under President Xi Jinping. By engagement, we mean things like trade, investment, development, assistance, diplomacy, and more. But what really set alarm bells ringing in the capitals of the US and its Pacific allies like Australia and New Zealand was the striking of a security cooperation deal between China and the Solomon Islands in March 2022. This came just 3 or 4 years after the Solomon Islands switched its diplomatic recognition from Taiwan to the People's Republic of China. The pact was China's first known bilateral security agreement with the country in the region, and enhances things like Chinese training and supply of equipment for the police, and provides for the deployment of Chinese law enforcement personnel to the islands to assist in policing, a role traditionally held by the likes of Australia and New Zealand. The US and its allies also feared that the deal may set the groundwork for China to establish a permanent naval presence in the Solomon Islands, and did not hesitate to make their concerns public. The agreement set off a flurry of diplomatic activity, not just in the Solomon Islands, but in the wider Pacific, as the US and its allies rapidly tried to shore up and extend its engagement in the region. Here's just some of what went on after the agreement came to light in March 2022. In September 2022, US President Joe Biden held a landmark summit for Pacific Island leaders at the White House, and a second is planned for this month. In October last year, Australia signed an agreement with Fiji to strengthen military cooperation. Then in December, a delegation of Australian politicians visited Vanuatu, Micronesia and Palau. Things seemed to pick up speed in 2023, when in February the US reopened its embassy in the Solomon Islands after a 30-year absence. This is part of a significant American diplomatic build-up in the region, as the US also opened an embassy in Tonga in May, and has plans to open embassies in Kiribati and Vanuatu. Meanwhile, the high-profile diplomatic visits continued, with Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese visiting Fiji in March, US Secretary of State Antony Blinken visiting Papua New Guinea in May to sign a maritime security agreement, and then a few months later visiting Tonga, New Zealand and Australia. Even Emmanuel Macron got involved, as the French president visited New Caledonia, Vanuatu and Papua New Guinea in July. Also this year, the US has signed agreements to extend the compacts of free association with Micronesia and Palau, and is hoping to do the same with the Marshall Islands soon. So what is so important about these countries and this region that both the US and China are putting so much effort into courting? Firstly, there's obvious reasons like fishing rights, natural resources and crucial shipping routes. There's the potential for a great deal of cooperation on things like climate change, development and more. The region plays an important military role too, having been a major theatre of the Second World War, and later, controversially, the site of a large number of nuclear tests by the likes of the US and France. The Pacific remains the site of a number of key US military installations in places such as Guam and the Marshall Islands, and in the event of any conflict in the area, say over Taiwan, any additional ally would be a boon to both the US and China. The Chinese push in the region, aside from challenging the US, comes with a lot of benefits for Beijing. For starters, of the 13 remaining countries that recognise Taiwan, 4 of them are Pacific Island nations. China is already making inroads on this as the Solomon Islands and Kiribati switched their recognition in 2019. Engagement with these countries also provides lucrative business opportunities for Beijing. For example, the Solomon Islands recently secured a $66 million loan from Export-Import Bank of China to build a network of more than 160 mobile towers built and run by Chinese tech giant Huawei. It's worth remembering, though, that at the centre of this great power rivalry is a number of small, relatively not well-off countries facing the common threat of climate change, and without a great deal of diplomatic clout. So in many ways, this renewed attention from the US and China is good news for them. More attention, more investment, more trade, more assistance, and so on. But at the same time, being in this position comes with downsides. It opens them up to coercion and pressure, and their view of what security is does not always align with the view of Washington or Beijing. Additionally, the battle for influence can, and in some cases already has, resulted in increased insecurity and instability. Take Vanuatu, for example, whose Prime Minister was recently removed by a no-confidence vote amid a crisis stemming from his signing of a security pact with Australia. He's since been replaced by a former Prime Minister who previously pushed for warmer ties with China and now wants to reassess the pact with Australia. More dramatic than this was an outbreak of unrest in the Solomon Islands in 2019, sparked, among other things, by the Solomon Islander government's decision to ditch Taiwan and instead recognise the government in Beijing. The leaders of a number of Pacific Island countries, including those who signed agreements with foreign powers, have tried to stress that their interest is development and security, and that their goal is to stay neutral. Fijian Prime Minister Sitiveni Rabuka has warned against US and Chinese efforts to polarize the Pacific, adding that it should be a zone of peace and a zone of non-aligned territories, which, with the trajectory of US-China relations, may prove a difficult task. Now, if you want to know more about this topic, we actually discussed it in the daily discussion. There, Rory and Zach sat down to discuss the intricacies of this conflict to help us better understand what's really going on. In fact, we release these daily discussions, well, daily, covering a huge variety of topics in a more analytical and detailed way than is possible in these main videos. The entire series is available exclusively on our streaming service Nebula. If you've been thinking about signing up, then I have some good news. For a limited time, we're offering lifetime memberships. Yep, if you sign up for a lifetime membership, you get access for as long as both you and Nebula exist. Plus, you're also funding new original content from your favourite creators. In fact, if you sign up using our link, then a third of that money goes straight to us, and the rest goes into the pool to develop new Nebula originals with bigger budgets and better production. Now, it's clearly a lot of money, and honestly, the best value plan is still the annual one. But if you really want to support independent creators and help us make even bigger projects, then this is the best option. Again, do make sure you use our link so that they know that you're supporting TLDR. And also, this offer only lasts until the end of the month, with no guarantee it'll ever be offered again. So, if you're interested, this is your opportunity. Anyway, thanks for your support and for signing up to Nebula.